Hello, everybody. We're back. Welcome to Project Sovereign. Today we're with Sacha Stone. Sacha is a former rock musician and artist growing up in Zimbabwe throughout the war for independence. He has dedicated his life to the evolution of human consciousness through numerous projects, including Humanitad, the International Tribunal for National Justice, and the New Earth Project. He's also a writer, filmmaker, and public speaker. Sacha, thank you for doing all you do. And thank you for taking the time with me today.
Bless you, Alex, and good to meet you. It's natural justice, not national justice.
Oh,
Couldn't
natural.
talk about national justice.
I did actually write natural justice. It may be my accent. Sacha, your work runs very, very deep. I've scoured your websites and the work that you've done, and it may go over some people's heads if they haven't done like a degree of spiritual self-development work. I think it's probably best if I hand it over to you at the beginning here to like tell people who is Sacha and what is his work all about.
Thank you, Alex. I'm definitely not going to be talking about my story because I'll fall asleep myself. But I'll speak about the theme that I'm focused on, which, as you rightly say, is to do with natural justice, natural law, which is to say consciousness. Because it's really the same thing. When you begin to retool and repurpose your own life as a sovereign, where you begin to understand the fiction of our reality, and you consciously decide to begin the process of disentangling yourself from your story, curiously enough, then you move into natural law and a sense of universal logic, because at the end of the day, we've got 7.5 billion human souls scuttling around on the surface of the earth, all of us cult programmed by religions and by cultures and by family and by moral dogma and all the rest of it. And that's cute as part of an evolutionary cycle. That's cute. But there also comes a time when we need to step outside of those individual stories and those cultural stories and those kind of spiritual philosophical stories, and begin to see that there's a greater universal logic to things, and that if you observe the reality of what's happening at the planetary level right now, you see that we're moving into a huge and epochal upgrade, one way or the other, which is why we're seeing the death of the old order, the death of the old systems. Old bad ideas and old bad dreams are falling apart, and they're leaving all of us feeling pretty naked and vulnerable. But that's precisely the point of a paradigmatic shift, is that we have to move through a discomfort zone where we all really don't have a secure foothold. And we have to then identify with that which is real, which is whatever corresponds to natural law, the fractality of nature, pure truth, right action. These are the things that begin to define a true grounding, a true reality. And then we can move into that spirit of consciousness, that spirit of sovereignty, and follow the dictates of our imagination. But this time, tooled up with the navigation set to not allow ourselves ever again to be cult programmed. And that's, I think, the beauty of where we're at right now, especially on the eve of this calamity that's happening in the United States.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about that actually. What is your opinion on that whole thing? Because for me, it's a difficult one whereby I know the government is never going to liberate a human being, but it seems there's dark forces at work in the world, and one side of it seems to be feeding that a lot more than the other. So where do you sit with that?
Well, it goes back more or less to exactly what I was saying 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago in a series of interviews at the beginning of this Corona pantomime, this theatrical production, and I haven't changed my position at all. What I said at the time, which is now I think being proven out, is that we are doing a civilizational detox. And that is a process that we need to move through. And we need to hold our center as we move through that civilizational detox. We're going to see the collapsing of the Tower of Babel, of the Babylonian edifices, of the hubris and the arrogance and the stupidity of our species over thousands of years. We've erected a lot of false light constructs like usury, banking, profiteering, supremacy, dominion, control, manipulation, invisible mastery, secret societies, Vatican complex, hegemony of the crowns of Europe, the Anglo-American Compact, the papal bulls of discovery, the systematic desecration of the black skin, brown skin, red skin, and yellow skin peoples over the last 500 years, aka blood sacrifice, aka Canaanite ritualism. So all of that stuff has happened on our watch as a species. Now, all of that heinous blood cult and the dream spell needs to be purged fully if we're to move into the next upgrade of the spiral of ascension, which is written into any program. Again, that's natural law.
Yeah.
If you understand the machinations and the mathematics of the spiral galaxy of the Milky Way, if you understand the machinations and the cycles of our solar system and the movement of planets around the sun, if you understand the machinations and the rhythms and the pulses of the leptons and quarks and subatomic particles and cells and molecules and the building blocks of reality, they all correspond to natural laws. Which is Fibonacci, golden mean, MSET mathematics. There's all sorts of things that you can be clever about if you want to drill in and understand the building blocks of our reality. All of that shite doesn't matter. What matters is that you are feeling and being in the now and really sensing, beginning to tap into your inner knowing, the innate logic, the spiritual dimension of who you are, who you be. And that's what we need to start to become informed by, not the cult programming, again, of media, of academia, of Hollywood, of family, of moral dogma, of spiritual philosophy, of books, of treatises, of old ideas, old imaginings. That's the beauty of now. So I'm seeing 6, 7, 8 months down the line from the onset of this crowning event, this great corona event, I'm seeing exactly that. I'm seeing the end of that death rattle, which is why it looks so scary and sounds so scary. If you believe still the false light images on the television screens or on your Samsung or your iPhone or the billboards or the magazines, anything coming at you through the associated news networks, anything coming at you through mainstream media or mainstream academia is a goddamn deception. It's in black and white. We are living through the time of revelation, which is helter-skelter. It means that you flip the script 180 degrees if you want to get halfway closer to the truth on any issue. Or you plug in to your innate Christed nature, your supernature, and you start the divination process of navigating through the goddamn deceptions and the lies that are everywhere. But again, that's the compression of the serpent. It's the compression of ages of blood cultism and of dream spell. And it's at its absolute highest state of compression right now, which is why it's so stark. Everything seems as though it's under a witchcraft, under a spell, because it is. You have a zombie apocalypse happening on the streets all around the world. You've got the biggest mass protest in the history of this world. You've got the biggest blind response and reactivity by governments all around the world to those protests. It's like they're not even happening. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, or 10 million people on the streets. The government is already locked into its own dream spell. It is fulfilling its remit. It's taking its central command and control from supranational, transnational, Sabbatean, satanic, Luciferian interests. It doesn't care about the living souls. It does not care about the sons and daughters of God, which is you and I. But that's the perfect time for us to flame the human heart and to reclaim this world. It's all good. What's coming out of this in the coming days and weeks and months is all good. It's all perfect.
Yeah, it seems to me like, you know, when there's like a clearing of water and you can sort of get a sieve and all the shit comes into the sieve and the water's clean at the bottom. it seems to me that we're sort of rattling the sieve at the moment, and we're noticing all the crap, people walking around wearing masks, and you've got the US election, which is so uncertain. And it seems to me that the mess and the dirt is just sitting there waiting to be revealed.
Yes. Well, I rather suspect that one Donald J. Trump has baited the entire Democratic Party, all of the Sabbatean and satanic and Luciferian interests connected to the global political multinational apparatus through media and so on is all connected to the story. But if you look at on the ground what's happening with the rigged ballots and all of the dead souls voting, and you just understand the math of what's taking place with the ballots. It's all rigged, but I believe that Trump and the so-called white hats have baited the demon into this so that they can fully expose themselves through voter fraud, which is going to make it very easy for the First Army or the National Guard to really go around mopping up all the deviants, because they all would have showed their hand. And nothing more diabolical than that absurd grimace coming out of the face of that sock puppet Joe Biden, who's a career pedivore and racketeer. Which is proven out. The forensics are in. We know exactly what this motherfucker's been up to for the last 47 years. We know exactly what his background is as an arch racist. Of course, they flipped that script on Trump. Karl Marx, the father of cultural Marxism, social Marxism, Karl Marx, that old deviant man with a long bushy beard, who himself was financed by Wall Street and the Zionist Sabbateans back in the day when they were financing the toppling of the Romanov dynasty and the imposition of communism into Russia, which thankfully Vladimir Putin has reclaimed the Russian people from. But Karl Marx himself said it best, which is that, you know, what you do in a situation like this is you flip the script and you accuse, you point accusations at people of the very thing that you're doing. So that's exactly what the socialist, communist, Marxist, Democratic Party in the United States. And again, I don't care about politics. I don't care about politics or political parties. I've never commented on in my life up until this last 4 years. And I speak about Trump not as a Republican, but as a human being working at the behest of a group of white hats and good strategists who are reclaiming this world from the tyranny of Satanism and Luciferianism. But again, I say it's all good. Joseph Biden, Nancy Pelosi, the entire Democratic apparatus of leadership is deeply, deeply embedded still in ritual Satanism, in pedophile rings, in criminal racketeering, in treason and sedition against the good living souls of the United States. And all of that will be fleshed out by the end of this saga. Whether it takes 2 weeks, 2 months, or 6 months, it doesn't really matter to me. Time is not the issue. The detoxing is the issue. A true purging of all of those subliminal forms of dream spell again and witchery and black magic. That all needs to surface through the collective. So if that manifests in the field as being civil breakdown and kind of the orchestration of Antifa, BLM, financed saboteurs and provocateurs, they're also going to lead paper trails directly back to their funders. They already do. So it's all good. All of it is good one way or to other.
Yeah, I think Einstein's question, do you live in a friendly universe? I think if you can actually embody that you do, and everything is actually playing out for the benefit and the expansion of consciousness itself, you can never actually end up in a space of fear and make rational decisions and fall into that, as you call it, the spell of the Satanism, because you essentially realize that everything is happening here is manifesting out for the good of everything.
Yes. Yes, it is. And I mean, I was writing political treatises and essays and world leadership reports, which were being published through Humanitad, my foundation. I've been writing them since about 2004, 2005, and pretty much calling most of what we're seeing out early in the day. There are other noble fellows of mine who've been at it a lot longer. David Icke is a classic example of that. But the fact of the matter is that I'm not shocked by any of what I'm seeing. I'm thrilled by it. I'm borderline euphoric because I know that when you see these kinds of dark images manifesting on the holographic screen of life, it means that they are no longer sublimated. They're no longer being kept in the basement. And that to me is what Revelation, the reckoning, is all about. So people have to, at this time, more than any other time in their lives, need to again do the divinations, need to connect with your inner knowing, because it's that psionic intelligence in the gut that is going to navigate us through this. It's not going to be informed wisdom or informed logic that we're going to be told by the press or told by political pundits. None of them are going to be able to direct the outcome. You need to understand the seminal piece connected to quantum physics and quantum mathematics, which is that what we think, what we hold in ideation and then project through plasma, which is life force, attention, that is what manifests in the field always. So cities manifested not by themselves overnight. They manifested because a lot of greedy, stupid people over a long period of time who were kept in profiteering enclosures, the merchant classes, the bankers, the principalities, the papacies, all of the controlling mechanisms working with the mercantile class of commerce and exchange, they conjured up cities out of nothing, out of green fields and forests. Before that, you and I, living men and women of the living soil, were very happy connected to the agrarian communities, the contributionist societies. We were happy connected to the living soil, but it was that mercantile class and that profiteering and class of supremacy and dominion and control and manipulation that by stealth crept into the civilizational matrix and slowly started to congregate humans into churches and then cathedrals and then into cities. And those cities have always been the utility of the satanic, the Saturnian, the Luciferic, and the Sabbatean, which is to say, the invisible mastery. And this is the end of cities now. You're seeing for the first time in 500 years, you're seeing now people speaking about New York, Manhattan as being over. It's over. It's dead. New York will never recover from this. London is dead. It will never recover. They shouldn't recover.
In what sense do you mean, Sacha? In what sense do you mean economically or people living there?
You can't separate economy from living souls. So economy is connected to ecology, and ecology is connected to the time and motion and life force of millions of souls. It's the same thing. It's just different expressions of the living souls and how we are controlled and manipulated. The fact that we've been controlled and manipulated into this harvest cycle of COVID-19 scamdemic and the whole conjuring trick that's going on with masking and isolationing and roll your sleeves up and get your injection, get tracked and traced. All of that heinous shite is a part of a conjuring trick. And it's all about herding us again into a psychological enclosure. It's rather like a city, but it's a city in the mind, one where they can still track and trace and keep us under containment. You have to use fear as the prime mover for that. And that's what this perverse class of Illuminati have perfected, that art, that craft of fear, of indoctrination, and they do it in every way, shape, and form. They engineer the icons for us, like the Greta Thunbergs, whatever that little sock puppet is called. They conjure these kinds of evil little sock puppets in Mother Teresa, Che Guevara, Bill Gates, the great philanthropist, Anthony Fauci, the great public health administrator. These are all deviant, partially sold, many uninsold entities that are posturing, masquerading as the philanthropist, as the caretaker, as the whatever. Many people, the anchor men and women in the TV stations, TV networks, these are also they're not fully ensouled human beings. So those icons have all also been engineered into play and then situated, financed, and placed on the checkerboard so that they do the conjuring. They are the ones doing the conjuring. Right now, you've got this cardinal from the Vatican who is writing these open letters to Donald Trump and making a huge song and dance about the need for the Catholic Church and the Vatican to be taken down and reforged, reformatted. Now the question is that cardinal doing it as a true outsider with the Christed light in his heart, or is he part of a controlled narrative financed by the Black Papacy to come out and help to do a demolition exercise so that they can continue to restructure and reformat the new Vatican 2.0? That's most likely the case, because it's to my knowledge, it's very unlikely that any cardinal gets to sit with his little purple patch on his head and in his robes and make those kinds of comments without being dead before dawn. But that's just me. Call me a cynic.
How ancient does that run? How far does it go back? Are we talking Atlantis, Sumerian? How far back do you think this control, when did it begin, do you think?
Let me start off by saying it doesn't matter when it began. And I think it's a very important thing for me to say as a preamble. It doesn't matter whether it was the Phoenicians, the Black Phoenicians, the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Caesars of Rome. It doesn't matter. What matters is you and I here and now, and how you and I, as the living sons and daughters of God, as the Adam, how we choose to alchemize it into a higher expression. That's what matters. But it is an interesting question nonetheless. And yes, one can talk about the galactic wars. We can go back 200 million odd years in our conversations and we'd be more or less accurate. So yes, but then you have to also factor that the human being is made up of trillions and trillions of hormones and genes and cells and atoms and what have you. And the microbes within our body that make up you and I as a human being, we are 95, 98% non-human at the level of cellular DNA, because 95, 98+% of our cellular DNA is microbial cellular DNA. What does that teach us? It teaches us that we're scarcely human, that most of us, the fractal antenna, which is the radio transmission and reception technology, is in our blood. It's in the DNA. So DNA is a fractal antenna that is able to communicate through the quantum. It's able to communicate through universes, okay, and across all so-called vectors of time space. The fact is that we're teeming in our bodies, in the gut, in the microbiome, with these different fractal antennas that are picking up the signaling, okay, and the inertia and the objectives and the agendas of elemental cloud intelligences, of non-terrestrial intelligences, and so on. So a human being is a highly multifarious antenna system when it's born. And we've got in our trace DNA, Draco, Reptilian, Andromedan, Pleiadian, Arcturian, Assyrian, Orion, all of these different ET types are variously through the ages hybridized through us, because the fact is that in the year 2020 of the Julian Babylonian calendar, we are highly compromised as the Adam. But what's emerging through all of that confluence of galactic DNA, is emerging through the center of that is the Adam, is the Christed nature, the Christed light. And that's the thing that the serpent, the proverbial serpent, can't understand, cannot cogitate, cannot work against. The reason why they're trying to throw us into a dream spell and make us all volunteer our arms up for a vaccination program is because the vaccination program was always intended. Certainly for the last couple of 100 years, it's been planned by the Jesuits. If you read the Jesuit oath that all popes take, you will understand it's already enshrined and encoded in the Jesuit oath, which is a very deviant doctrine. And what it's saying is that it will ultimately force every living soul into abnegating their own soul covenant. And they will force it upon us. Use any measure or means necessary to do so. They will use terror. They will use every form of witchery to be able to do that. And they will do that in the name of Christ. That was what that deviant moron Ignatius Loyola dreamt up early in the day. And people want to understand a little bit more about Ignatius Loyola and how about he was demonically possessed that fine day when he stopped his caravan on the road, told his people, I need to be alone, walked into a meadow for a few hours, came back a changed man, carried on with his caravan, and there he had the whole vision. That man was almost certainly overtaken by a demonic possession at that time. And we've seen 500 years of blood cultism issue off the back of essentially Jesuiticism, because that is the source code of the Black Papacy, which runs the Vatican complex and which drives and has driven the imperial hegemony of all the crowns of Europe through infiltration and stealth over the last few hundred years, which ended up being the Anglo-American Corporation, the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, which then franchised Dreamspell to the world through the opium trade. Opium trade was the forebear of the drug trade, both legal drugs and illegal drugs, pharmaceutical and street drugs. Both owned and controlled by the same and enforced by the CIA and by the military intelligence apparatus and all of the intelligence apparatus of the world, which was all financed and engineered through the Vatican as well. So you see how the entire rollout of the Sabbatean, Luciferic, satanic agenda is command and control, goes back to this very small echelon of the so-called Black Papacy.
And to what end? Is that for power? Is it for life force? What's it
well,
for?
Let me start by saying that it was you and I and our fellows at the collective oversoul level that have generationally invoked that story into manifestation.
Sure.
So the Black Papacy and all of the crimes and travesties and calamities of bloodlust and blood cultism and cult programming has all happened as a result of the abnegation or the surrendering of our conscience, our consciousness along the way, incrementally. So nothing happened to us. We've never been victims. It's all part of a perfect geometry of orchestration. We allowed that to happen for a 500-year cycle. There's a greater cycle of about 6,500 years, actually, since we reached the nadir point in the last grand yuga of the grand precession of the equinox. And to the nadir point, the low point of that was about 6,500 years ago. So one could really look back at the last 6,500 years, but you can go back to 12,500 years ago, to when we last passed through the photon band that we're passing through now. Astrophysically, we're moving through that photon band, which the last time we did was when Noah and the Ark happened, because the planet had a reset at that time as well. Right. There was an entire meltdown at the psycho-spiritual level, and an audit was done. We failed the audit. There was a reset. The deluge happened. Humanity was saved, but that seeding came back in, and we've had 12,500 years of resurrecting ourselves from that failed Atlantean seeding. So yes, we need to go back in that sense to Atlantis and recognize that here in the year 2020 of the Babylonian Julian calendar, we are living in the thrall still of the echo chamber of the shadow of the fallen light of Atlantis. And that's the stuff that we are now consciously emerging and awakening within and through. And that is the power of the Christ. That is the power of Bodhisattva. That is the power of the enlightenment of any human being in any time. But now it's happening at the collective level, not just at the individuated level, like what happened to the apocryphal Jesus, Master Jesus, or the apocryphal Gautama Siddhartha Buddha, or the apocryphal Osiris, or any of these other stories, because they're all stories essentially that have been engendered around living totems. But the point is, those individuated, emancipated, enlightened beings, 99.9% of whom were always male for some strange reason, that's behind us. Now we move into the true second coming, which is the flaming of the collective Christed light within the atom seed of humankind. And that can only happen amongst the sons and daughters of God, who are the living souls whose feet are connected to the living soil. So that's why I referred to it as the living souls connected to the living soil is really that's the regenesis point, because it's the relationship between humanity and the land, the soil, the earth plane that is essential. It's vital. That's why moving away from cities and from concrete, from asphalt, from all the mutant isotope frequencies of steel and all of these manufactured plastics and so on, they are all part of an unconscious conspiracy to deviate us and then disconnect us from the telluric energies of the soil, the living earth. It's the reconnection to the living soil that we, you and I, and our fellows need to enact and embody in our time if we are truly to move into the ascension spiral, so to speak.
I do notice it, to be fair. I do notice people saying, I need to reconnect. I feel stressed. I feel, this, that, the other. And it seems to have got to a point now where people can't handle it anymore without some form of nervous breakdown or something.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, because we've been so mind-fucked and artificialized systemically over the last 500 odd years, it's gone on for thousands of years. Actually, if we speak about the Caesars of Rome, but let's just talk about in the last 400 or 500 years since the papal bulls of discovery, the doctrine of discovery, gave permission again to the imperial houses of Europe to go forth and conquest the entire world, subjugate and murder and cull and harvest all of our brothers, black skin, brown skin, red skin, and yellow skin brothers. So that was white supremacy in a sense happening under the dominion of the papacy, and that blood cult set the tempo and set the tone, set the pulse of what we've arrived at as a civilization, which is again greed, fear, time, money, supremacy, control, and dominion, absolute tyranny, absolute antithesis to our Christed nature, which is to be living sons and daughters of God on the living soil, the Adam.
And what can people do in these times? Because there's a lot of people with struggling mental health, labeled as mental health problems. What can people do to claim their own sovereignty and start self-actualizing? What specific exercises or ways of acting and being in the world would you recommend them to do?
Eat soil. I say that half jokingly. Go back to the microbes, the fractal antenna of the earth. Go back to trees and nature and soil every day, whether you live in a tenement block or not. Connect with a cactus on your window pane. I'm quite serious. I'm not being sarcastic here. Okay. I wouldn't dream of being sarcastic. I'm aware of how many tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people are trapped in shitty situations, okay? Fucked up by their poverty, by their income brackets, trapped in tenement blocks. I get it. And I'm not being sarcastic, but I really mean this. I know a story of a woman who's alive today in prison in North America. She is innocent. She was a doctor who was healing people of cancers, and she got tricked by the system. She's in prison, and next year I'm hoping to do something about it. She's been in prison for decades. Now, this woman, this blessed woman, is alive and functioning because she goes out to the yard every day, and she scratches a little bit of the soil under the one plant, the one tree in the yard, and she puts that in her mouth. And that the microbes inside the living soil is what boots up, like a probiotic, boots up her microbiome and keeps her immune system from dying. That's why she's still alive. She's that smart. But and that's something I take with me every day of my life. I think of that woman because that story really epitomizes the travesty of our times. But that's my answer to you, is reconnect with the living soil, with trees. Fuck the ordinances, the regulations, and these criminal compliances that governments and so-called authorities, all of whom are in sedition and treason, are trying to force you into your little rat hole. Get out of your rat hole, unmask. Civil disobedience is a duty of care, is your godly duty at a time of madness. You need to speak. You need to talk. You need to exchange your ideas. You need to make yourself heard. You need to scream. You need to thunder and rage. You need to not acquiesce. You need to not obey. You need to never cause harm, loss, or injury to another living soul, but fuck the system, because the system is not a living soul. The system is a dead entity. It's a corporate fiction masquerading as something that's real. That means it is in treason against the living sons and daughters of God Most High. So we have a duty of care, every one of us who have a pulse, who have blood, red blood in our veins, who have any kind of Christ or Buddha or Krishna consciousness in us. We are the ones, and by that I also include my beloved Islamic brothers and sisters, and their own attendance to their own mystical traditions and the traditions of their prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We are all of us sons and daughters of God in that sense, and all of us must reconvene in this quanta, this vector of our humanity, of our humanness. We have been overtaken by the serpent, overtaken by the dominion of the fiction, the dead fiction, the corpse, the corporation masquerading as a government. Your government is a privately owned corporation. It is held in trust. You are a trust. You are a treasury bond. You are a fiction on a fucking piece of paper called a birth certificate or a birth registration certificate or a treasury bond. So we have had our humanness, our humanity shredded out of us, torn away from us. And we've been offered up to Rex, the king, to the crown, to Cronus, the titan that devours its own young from birth. From the moment that a piece of steel blade severed the umbilical cord, that in itself was an illicit and unlawful action that happened over recent generations when we lost sight of how we should be birthing our children into this world. I could go on at a great length. I'll leave it at that. Just to say that my answer to that question is remember, remember, remember.
Nice. Beautiful. And how important is it for us not to fall into a state of victimhood? Because saying what you're saying now, you could go, oh God, there's no hope. We're a victim of circumstance. How easy is it, obviously, to fall into that? And how important is it for us to sort of rise above that state?
It's as important as salvaging your soul from becoming space dust. So that's down to each one of us to weigh and measure in the sanctity of our own hearts. So it's vital that we all understand that any idea that I'm a victim of anything ever is how the serpent gets into my life and deviates me from my divine nature, from my supernature, and then begins to slowly creep in and co-opt and take over my life and lets me believe that I'm a victim of my income bracket or of my bad education or of my fucked up human family DNA or whatever the story we tell ourselves. Victimhood, victimization is the seminal part to the nanny culture of how we've allowed the dominion of governments and third parties to control the Catholic Church. The intervention, the intercessionary principle has only ever come into our lives because somewhere along the line at the soul level and then at the practical level, you and I made the fatal mistake of believing that we could be saved from ourselves from an external force, be that the Luciferic Christianity, because most of Christianity is false light Christianity, it's idolatry. It's the kind of thing that would make the Master Jesus puke. But most Christians are shuffled to church, not that they can go to church any longer, but are unfortunately still caught up themselves in idolatry and false light worship. They're worshiping the idols, the icons, the words, the scriptures, the dogma, the doctrine, which is the dream spell, none of which you should pay much attention to. But the living teacher, the living teachings of the Master Jesus or Isa bin Maryam is indefatigable is the word. It never, ever gets old. It never, ever loses its vitality, its vibrancy. We need to own that Christed message for ourselves and take that forward in our actions, in our living actions. That is how we step out of indentureship, enslavement to the idea that I'm a victim of anything, because I'm not.
And the opposite of that, for me anyway, is sovereignty. That's why my organization is called Project Sovereign. So what is sovereignty to you?
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Alex. And yes, you're absolutely right. Well, the thing is this, you don't even need to concern yourself with sovereignty, because if you're conducting right action and pure truth in the living moment of now, every single moment, and you force yourself, you train yourself, you inspire yourself incrementally as you grow, as you evolve, as you express, as you expand, as you affirm as a living soul, you own every moment and you start to become actualized and conscious of every moment. And you recognize that every living moment is the spark of the divine, is the spark of the actualized consciousness, is your coherence to the flaming of your divine nature. There is never a separation between you and God, and that your Christed nature is your protection. That is your defense. That is your protection. You don't even need to think about protection and defense. You just need to stand in the ownership of that. It's called Atman. It is owning yourself in the now. It's owning your divine nature. You see, the sovereignty comes as a result of that. So you don't need to concern yourself with sovereignty, because you concern yourself only with right action and pure truth in the now, and causing no harm, loss, or injury to another living soul. Again, that's it. That's the credo. That's the spiritual philosophy, and that's the alpha and the omega. And sovereignty then naturally emerges. That is the crystalline energy that just comes out of you, and you can walk down the street and you magnetize people to you. You magnetize beauty towards you. You magnetize prosperity and abundance towards you. The elevation of art and beauty and consciousness and affirmation and grace, all of that stuff is a natural byproduct of you stepping into that flame of sovereignty. But that flame comes of its own accord. In fact, I'm more concerned now about sovereignty becoming a new form of idolatry. And I'm urging people, be careful you don't make the mistake of talking up sovereignty and studying up on the books of how you can fuck the system. That's all beautiful. I love all of that stuff. But that's not it. Sovereignty is me stepping into my true human nature, and to be absolute in that being and that knowing and that doing.
Beautiful, yeah. In my mind, we have, once again, it's a two-sided thing. You've got your collectivists and you've got your individualists, which are just ideologies that people have. But what I tend to see is that people don't want to individually take responsibility for themselves and their own enlightenment and their own consciousness awareness, that they're more than happy to go to church, listen to the government or whatever. And this is sort of manifested now to me in this whole COVID pandemic that we're going through. It's like the scientists know we'll have to follow what the scientists are saying. They've got our best interests at heart. And they've got people, I'm in Turkey at the moment, and you've got people walking on the beach, nobody else on there with their masks on. And it's like there's zero sovereignty in that individual.
Well, look, I mean, I could speak to so much of what you just said, but let me just start with the science and the scientists. So in the first instance, we're still caught up in a polarized, dualistic, helter-skelter framework of reality. So let's just look at science and scientists. Well, when they say science and scientists, who are they referring to as scientists, and what science? Well, they are referring to bad science and corrupted scientists. What is a corrupted scientist? A corrupted scientist is a scientist that calls itself a scientist but doesn't follow the rudiments of science. What they do is they follow the dictates of their own pernicious greed. They take their grants, they take their bursaries, they get financed by Big Pharma. They get financed by these government committees that pay them very handsomely to churn out the kind of bullshit that governments want them to churn out regarding autism and the connection to vaccinations, or cancer and the connection to sugars, and so on and so on. So, you know, bad science and bad scientists are part of a corrupted hegemony of evil empire that we're still trying to rebirth ourselves through. So forget the bad scientists. I'm blessed that I've been working with many of the most iconic good scientists and good science for the last 20 years. And in the last few weeks, as some of your audience will know, I produced and moderated with my team a World Health Sovereignty Summit, and then an event called The Line in the Sand, which if you haven't seen, you ought to. That was a 5-hour marathon broadcast, and we brought together Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Del Bigtree and G. Edward Griffin and Dr. Dolores Cahill and Judy. We didn't have Mikovits on that event, but we had her leading up to it. Dr. Rashid Buttar, Dr. Cordy Williams, all of these great iconic people, about 40 of them, we had on a back-to-back 5-hour broadcast. I never left my seat in that 5 hours, moderating it. So, and because it was that interesting. And that's good science. So if you want to know what good science is and what good doctoring and good public health administration should look like, then go and check out the World Health Sovereignty Summit. We did it last year, actually, here in Bali. We staged it as a physical event when we launched the Judicial Commission of Inquiry, and not far from here, where the court was set up, and we launched a Judicial Commission of Inquiry into weaponization of the biosphere, because over a year and a half ago, we were predicting that this was going to happen, and how right we were. The weaponization of the biosphere is what happens when you get generational satanic governments in an orchestration of evil. And I'm talking about highly compartmentalized elements within those governments, okay? Most people running government, civil servants, and the rest, 95% of them are decent people caught in a shitty job and just paying the bills like the rest of us. But the highly compartmentalized echelon of wickedness that all of those other good people in those systems knows fully about now. All good police know now how rotten their core are. All good doctors and nurses in hospitals and clinics around the world and the Public Health Administration know full well how evil and how wicked the Public Health Administration and the health ministries have become, and so on. So all of that is kind of doing unto itself. But good science and good doctors is what we should be paying attention to. Unfortunately, we still have the collusion of the rigged satanic mainstream media machine, owned and controlled by about 5 Khazarian mobsters, and we know who they are, and they're not long for this world. That much I can be quite certain. But you've got this highly weaponized mainstream media complex running through Associated News networks, Agence France Presse, Reuters, and about 12 primary networks from Australia to Manhattan that are containing the dream spell and the spell binding. Hollywood, that bewitchment, satanic, black magic industrial machine, has all but been taken down in the last 2 years. That was one of the bold strikes of taking down Weinstein and then leading that on to what we've been seeing, a collapse of the Hollywood machine and the exposure and disclosure of the wickedness, the treachery, the evils behind that machine. Again, I know a lot of A-listers. People who know me and know my life for the last 20 years know that I hang with A-listers and have done for 25 years. So I know good people in that machine. I know good, top-notch, Oscar-winning film directors and actors and actresses. And most of them are absolutely devastated by the revelations that they're seeing and hearing. So it's not that the whole machine was rotten, but it is that 15-20% thereabouts, one imagines, was absolutely evil to the core. And that was the bit that was controlling the machinery, controlling the financing. It all comes back to who controls the coin, who the core producers are that are paying for those scripts to be written on subjects that are drip fed to the script writers, all of whom are hanging around in the Hollywood Hills desperate for a gig. You know, it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Music business, same thing. That was my old satanic snake pit that I was involved in. And I saw firsthand, which is why I folded up my tent and got the fuck out of Dodge in the year 2000, 2001, because it stank. And because I recognized absolutely the gun that was being put, proverbial gun that was being putting at my head, our head, as an independent stadium rock band. And it was so clear to me, there was no possibility of moving forward unless we signed and did exactly what we were told. Right. And so I've lived through that myself. It was so long ago, I've almost forgotten it. But I'm speaking from a point of absolute authority. And again, I also know many of the main players of that evil empire. I brushed shoulders with them back in the day. I've seen the play, how it plays out. It is utterly toxic.
Yeah, yeah. And we've got, if you believe the mainstream figures, 7 billion or whatever it is, human beings, human souls on this planet. Do you think that these souls have a journey that we all have to go on, not to the degree that there's no free will, but something that they're here to achieve, or not so much achieve, but attune with?
Every single, and I don't want to sound like some sanctimonious spiritual philosophy here, because that creature I despise above all in many cases. Every single soul on earth is vital. That much I've learned. I've learned enough about fractal mathematics to have learned that you cannot have one incoherent fractal. Otherwise, the entire hologram is mutant and is incoherent. And that the divine light will not gain traction and pull us into the ineffable, immanent, immortal paradigm, which is what's written in to the atomic, molecular, cellular matrices of our reality. We are born to be immortal. We are meant to be immortal. We are meant to live for thousands of years in physicality and only move out of physicality when we choose by our divine will to soul migrate. Whereupon we move into the rainbow body, we invoke Merkaba, and we simply transpose our beauty, our immanence, our majesty to another quadrant, another vector in the limitless, multifarious dimension of being. So all of that is ahead of us, and I can almost, with some real certainty, pinpoint the date lines there now. I wouldn't have done that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I wasn't steeped enough in enough wisdom of the logic of the movement of the sun, moon, and stars, and the galactic rhythms, and also of where I now know we're moving as a species, as a divine species. But we've got more or less 26 years, 25 years ahead of us to move before we can hit the vertical ascension spiral, hit the waveform that takes us fully into this ascension spiral. We are ascending now anyway. That influx of vibral light, of UV light, is coming in anyway. It's impacting us on a minute-by-minute basis. That waveform of photons is incrementally increasing as it impacts our entire plane of the galaxy, our solar system, planet Earth, you and me. But that's a process. We move into a vertical upgrading in the year 2046 by today's reckoning and understanding of the cycles of the dynamics and the activities of the sun, knowing that micronova event in 2046, which incidentally, in the last 2 weeks, my crew, we conducted independent scalar divinations against the date lines on either side of 2046, and we proved in double-blind placebo that it's absolutely going to happen. Between the year 2045 and 2047, there is a micronova event which will bring about this upgrade and ascendancy pattern of humankind. Now, what's to happen between now and then? We've got an interesting passage between now and 2030, the next 10 years. I'd say it's a lot less than that, where we see the systemic dissolution of government and all governance superstructures. We're seeing the end of fiat usury in the kind of traditional sense of the traditional economics modeling. That's over. Fractional reserve lending, central banking, reserve banks, all of that stuff is out. All of that's going to move into some cynical different expressions and interpretations of finance and economics, but those will also not play out, and it'll move into the absence of usury. We're moving into the other, which will see an eradication of banking, of all central controlling of economics. And that's an essential part, because that will free humanity up into being able to breathe for the first time, all of us, and to be able to get out of those little hellholes that we've been forced to live in kill grids known as cities, and move back to the land, and move back to the soil, move back to agrarian communities, move back into contributionist micro nations and micro economies. All of that is coming in the next few years, and that will be a vastly sped up process. You will see this happening in days, weeks, and months, not even years ahead. And that's a promise. By the middle of next year, we'll revisit this conversation, I'm sure. But all of that's happening, and that's taking us toward the emancipation. Once you've removed the holocaust of money and money control, you remove that, then humans are able to breathe. We start to get back to the soil. Food becomes abundant again. Chemical poisoning of air, soil, and water moves away. Actualized consciousness begins to return. The frequency resets in the spin of atoms and the cohesion of cells in our bodies they can carry water and can bring in the angle of light, all of that starts to move into reconfiguration. That's part of a natural, organic, sentient reconstruction of, or regenesis of, the immanent immortal technology of who we are. All of that you and I will be able to see and feel and touch and experience in the coming days between now and 2030 and beyond. It's a beautiful journey ahead of those of us who have already managed to psycho-emotionally and psycho-spiritually, intellectually ourselves from the dream spell, from the bewitchment, the witchery of the lies and deceptions that are being spat at us about how terrible it all is. Climate change, scarcity economics, and we're all running out of resources. Go and fuck yourself. All of those creepy intellectual liberals who are still holding true to that venal, vicious, and soul dead entropic model of reality, the antithesis to the Christed flame. Take that diabolical imagineering and just put it where the sun doesn't shine. Christed beings have no more time, motion, energy for the dispensation of those lies coming out of the liberal intellectual class, which incidentally is personified by the mainstream media and mainstream academia, all those deviant people amongst us who are trying to hold on to their pensions and their salaries.
I think that was as a prediction, I think that's a fantastic way to close up. Is there anything you want to add in closing?
I'm not wanting to sell anything to anyone. I'm happy to answer questions if I'm qualified to answer any of them. But short answer is no. I don't have anything to sell. I'm just enjoying the process, Alex. I'm enjoying the process of you, actually, of you. You personify to me what I'm euphoric about. The fact that you and I are sitting many thousands of miles apart, completely connected by the empathic waveform of our brotherhood, our fellowship and love. And that to me is what it's all about.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I really do appreciate your time and your energy and your life force.